You wake at 6 in the morning to the familiar hum of air traffic streaming past your window on level 2500 of Coruscant, the endless vertical city that has been your home for 42 years. The only world you've ever known, despite it being a planet-wide metropolis of 1 trillion souls stacked in layers that stretch from the surface thousands of meters below to the gleaming towers of the upper levels, where senators and corporate executives breathe filtered air and never see the perpetual twilight of the mid-levels where ordinary people like yourself make their lives. Your wife, Sarah, sleeps beside you, her breathing soft and steady, and in the adjacent rooms, your 2 children, Kira, 16, and Davin, 14, still dream in their beds, their teenage bodies requiring sleep in quantities you vaguely remember needing before decades of early mornings and late nights running your business trained your body to function on 6 hours. You dress quietly in the worn but clean work clothes that define your identity: gray trousers reinforced at the knees, a tan work shirt with your business name, Kelrick Technical Repairs, embroidered over the breast pocket in blue thread that Sarah stitched herself when you opened the shop 20 years ago, sturdy boots with Durasteel reinforced toes because you work with heavy equipment and dropped tools can shatter bones. The refresher mirror shows a face you've grown comfortable with over 4 decades, weathered skin that's never seen natural sunlight because level 2500 exists in permanent artificial illumination. Brown eyes that have developed fine lines at the corners from squinting at circuit boards and welding sparks. Hair going gray at the temples and receding slightly at the forehead. The face of an honest working man who has built something modest but real through skill and persistence. The kitchen smells of calf brewing in the automatic dispenser, and you pour a cup while reviewing your datapad schedule for the day. 3 speeder repairs, a malfunctioning protocol droid that needs its memory core replaced, and a domestic kitchen unit that keeps cycling into self-cleaning mode and won't stop. Routine work, the kind of steady income that has supported your family for 2 decades, that paid for this 3-room apartment with its narrow balcony overlooking the traffic lanes, that funds Kira's education at the Technical Academy, and Davin's enrollment in the Junior Mechanics program, that allows Sarah to work part-time as a textile designer rather than full-time in some corporate processing facility. Your life is not glamorous or exciting, but it's yours, earned through honest labor and careful management of credits, and you feel a quiet pride in what you've built. The commute to your shop is 10 minutes via public transit, a crowded air speeder bus that stops every 3 blocks, packed with workers heading to their shifts in the factories and repair bays and service facilities that make this level function. You exchange nods with familiar faces, people whose names you don't know, but whose presence has become part of your daily routine over the years. The shop occupies a corner unit in a commercial block, a space perhaps 20 meters square with a rolling security door, a workbench along one wall, tool racks and part storage on the others, and a small front counter where you meet clients. The sign above the door, Kelrick Technical Repairs, honest work, fair prices, is faded but still legible, and when you roll up the security door and flip the sign to open, you feel the same satisfaction you felt every morning for 20 years. This is yours, this business, this skill, this contribution to your community. The day proceeds normally until evening, the sun you've never seen setting somewhere beyond the infinite layers of cityscape. The artificial lighting shifting from daylight spectrum to the softer amber of evening illumination that helps residents maintain circadian rhythms despite living in a place where natural day and night don't exist. You've just finished installing a new motivator in a delivery speeder and are cleaning your tools when you hear the distinctive whine of a police speeder pulling to a stop outside your shop. Through the open door, you see it. A Coruscant Security Force patrol craft, painted in the blue and gray livery of the planet's police service, its running lights casting blue strobes across the Duracrete street. 2 officers emerge, both human males in their 30s, wearing the standard CSF uniform. Dark blue tunic with rank insignia, utility belt with blaster and stun baton, helmets with integrated comm links and data displays. Their faces are visible through open visors, and there's something in their expressions that makes your stomach tighten with instinctive wariness. Not the professional neutrality of officers performing routine duties, but something harder, more predatory. The first officer, taller and broad-shouldered with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, approaches while his partner hangs back by the speeder. "Evening, citizen. Routine inspection. Need to see your business license and personal identification." His tone is conversational, but there's an edge to it, the sound of someone who knows he has authority and enjoys wielding it. You retrieve your datapad from behind the counter and pull up your licenses. Business operation permit renewed 2 months ago, personal ID chip data transmitted via near-field scan, and extend the pad toward him. He takes it with gloved hands and scrolls through the information with deliberate slowness, his eyes flicking between the screen and your face as if searching for discrepancies between what the records claim and what stands before him. "Everything's in order," you say, trying to keep your voice level and polite because you've heard stories about CSF officers who interpret any tone as disrespect and use it as excuse for escalation. Business tax is current, all permits valid through next quarter. The officer nods but doesn't return your datapad. Instead, he looks past you into the shop's interior. "Mind if we take a look around?" Standard procedure, making sure all equipment is properly licensed and safety protocols are being followed. It's not really a question, you understand immediately, because refusing would be interpreted as suspicious behavior, justifying a more thorough and disruptive investigation. You step aside and gesture toward the workshop. "Of course, officer. Nothing to hide." The second officer has entered now, younger with sharp features and eyes that scan your shop with the calculating assessment of someone inventorying possessions rather than inspecting for violations. He walks along your tool racks, occasionally reaching out to touch equipment. Your arc welder, your plasma cutter, your diagnostic scanner, as if checking for something you can't identify. "This welding unit," the younger officer says, tapping the welder with one gloved finger. "Where's the license documentation?" You move to the filing cabinet mounted on the wall and extract the appropriate permits. The welder was purchased 8 years ago from a licensed industrial supplier. All documentation in order, inspected and certified by CSF Technical Division as meeting safety standards. You hand the data sheet to the officer, and he studies it with exaggerated care, his lips moving slightly as if reading complex legal text, though the permit is a standard single-page form. After a long minute, he looks up and his expression is one of manufactured concern. "This certification expired 2 months ago. You're operating unlicensed heavy equipment. That's a code violation, Section 12-3 of the Coruscant Commercial Safety Regulations." Your heart drops because you know he's wrong. You checked all your permits during the renewal period. Everything was current, but when you look at the data sheet he's holding, you see something that makes your breath catch. The date stamp shows expiration 3 months ago, which is impossible because you distinctly remember the certification inspector visiting 6 months ago and approving the welder for another 2-year period. But arguing with police in Imperial Coruscant is a gamble that rarely pays off. So you choose your words carefully. "Officer, I believe there may be an error in the system. I had that welder inspected and certified 6 months ago, received a 2-year renewal. I have the documentation in my records. Are you suggesting our database is wrong?" The tall officer with the scar interrupts, his tone hardening. "That's a serious accusation, citizen, implying CSF records are falsified or corrupted." He steps closer and you can smell his breath, sour with stale calf and something sharper, maybe alcohol. "I'm looking at current database records pulled directly from Central Registry. They show expired certification. Unless you have physical documentation proving otherwise, you're in violation." You return to the filing cabinet with hands that have started trembling slightly, searching through your records for the certification form you remember receiving, but when you find the correct file folder, it's empty, the certification sheet missing. Your mind races trying to reconstruct when you last saw it, possibly weeks ago during your quarterly tax preparation, but you can't be certain. And regardless, the document isn't where it should be. It should be here. I know I was certified. This doesn't make sense. The younger officer has moved to your front counter and is leaning against it with studied casualness. Operating heavy machinery without proper certification is a serious violation. Standard penalty is immediate business closure pending investigation, plus a fine of 1,000 credits. Investigation typically takes 4 to 6 weeks, during which your shop remains sealed. He pauses, letting the implications sink in. 6 weeks without income would devastate your family's finances, would mean missed rent and pulled children from school, and Sarah forced into full-time work she doesn't want. Of course, the officer continues, his voice dropping slightly. There are alternative resolution procedures. Immediate correction citations can be issued on scene if the violation is minor and the business owner is cooperative. That would be a reduced fine, payable immediately, and you'd have 30 days to get proper recertification while maintaining operations. You understand now, the understanding arriving like cold water in your stomach. This is a shakedown, a practiced routine these officers have performed dozens or hundreds of times on business owners across this level and probably others. The missing certification, the expired database record, possibly legitimate mistakes, possibly deliberate manipulation, but regardless, the situation has been engineered to extract money from you with the threat of destroying your livelihood as leverage. The tall officer with the scar leans in close enough that you can see the network of broken capillaries across his nose, the signs of someone who drinks too much during off hours. 300 credits paid right now, and we issue the immediate correction citation. You get your recertification done within 30 days, and this whole thing disappears from official record. Or we can do this the formal way. Seal your shop, impound your equipment for evidence, full investigation with all associated costs and delays. Your choice. 300 credits is a week's profit, money you've budgeted for Kira's tuition payment due next month, but losing 6 weeks of business would cost you 20 times that amount, plus the compounding damage of lost clients who find other repair shops during your closure. The mathematics of extortion are simple and brutal. You move to your cash lockbox kept under the counter. You maintain physical credits for exactly these situations, government transactions and emergency expenses where electronic transfers leave traceable records, and count out 300 credits in small denomination chips, the physical currency cold and smooth against your fingertips. The younger officer produces a portable datapad and logs an immediate correction citation with your business license number. The whole transaction taking 30 seconds and generating an official record that looks legitimate, that shows CSF officers performing their duties and a business owner voluntarily paying a fine for admitted violations. They leave with your money, and you stand in your shop feeling something you haven't felt in 20 years of honest business. Violated, powerless, angry at an injustice you cannot fight because the perpetrators wear badges and carry the authority of law. You close the shop an hour early and take the transit home where Sarah reads the tension in your face immediately. Over dinner, a modest meal of reconstituted protein and synthesized vegetables that your children eat without complaint because they've never known better. You tell her what happened, and you see the same sick recognition in her eyes because she's lived on Coruscant her entire life too, has heard the same stories from neighbors and relatives, knows that police corruption is not an aberration, but a feature of Imperial governance where power flows downward and accountability flows nowhere. Maybe it's a one-time thing, she says without conviction, her hand finding yours across the table. Maybe they won't come back. But they do come back. 2 weeks later, the same pair of officers pulling up in their patrol speeder just as you're opening for the morning shift. This time, there's no pretense of routine inspection. The younger officer walks directly to your parts inventory shelves and begins examining components with exaggerated suspicion. We've had reports of smuggling activity in this sector. he announces loud enough for passing pedestrians to hear. Loud enough to damage your reputation even though you know the accusation is baseless. Black market droid parts, stolen speeder components. Where do you source your inventory? You provide invoices from legitimate suppliers, wholesalers licensed by Imperial Commerce Authority, every transaction documented and taxed. But the officer studies each invoice as if it's written in alien script, occasionally making notes on his datapad, creating a performance of investigation that's designed to intimidate rather than discover actual wrongdoing. The tall officer with the scar has positioned himself by your workshop entrance, his hand resting casually on his blaster holster in a gesture that's meant to be noticed, meant to remind you of the violence he's authorized to deploy if you become uncooperative. After 20 minutes of theatrical scrutiny, the younger officer declares that your inventory requires verification analysis at CSF headquarters, which would mean seizing your parts stock and leaving you unable to complete existing repair jobs or take new ones. Unless, he suggests with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, you're willing to pay for expedited on-site verification, which would allow the officers to conduct their analysis immediately without impounding your inventory. The cost, 500 credits. You pay because the alternative is business death, and you're beginning to understand that this is how the system works now, how it's always worked perhaps, but you were naive enough to believe that following rules and paying taxes would protect you. The officers return the following week with a different excuse, improper waste disposal despite you contracting with a licensed removal service, and extract another 400 credits. 3 days later, they're back claiming your business signage violates new dimensional regulations you've never heard of. Another 350 credits. Within 2 months, your carefully accumulated savings have evaporated, drained away in steady increments by police who have transformed law enforcement into a protection racket, where they are simultaneously the threat and the protection being sold. You attempt to report the corruption to the CSF district headquarters, scheduling an appointment with Captain Venn, who oversees this precinct. His office occupies the 12th floor of a government building, all polished durasteel and Imperial insignia. And when you're finally ushered into his presence after waiting 90 minutes, you find a man in his 50s wearing a captain's uniform crisp enough to suggest it's never been worn during actual field work. You explain the situation, the repeated shakedowns, the fabricated violations, the systematic extraction of credits, and Captain Venn listens with an expression of professional concern that doesn't quite reach his eyes. When you finish, he steeples his fingers and regards you with the practiced patience of someone who has heard similar complaints before and processed them through a well-established response protocol. My officers are tasked with maintaining Imperial standards of safety and regulatory compliance, he says, his voice smooth and bureaucratically empty. Your business has multiple documented violations as recorded in official CSF citations. The fact that you've been able to pay immediate correction fines rather than face formal prosecution demonstrates the leniency and flexibility of our enforcement approach. If you're having difficulty maintaining proper licensing and safety standards, perhaps you should reconsider whether you're qualified to operate a commercial repair facility in Coruscant's demanding regulatory environment. The dismissal is absolute, and you understand that Captain Venn isn't just aware of his officers' corruption. He's likely receiving a percentage, the extortion flowing upward through the chain of command until it reaches officials wealthy enough to no longer require personal involvement, but who maintain the system that enriches them. You leave headquarters with the sick certainty that there's no authority you can appeal to, no higher power that will intervene, because the corruption isn't a failure of the system but the system itself, functioning as designed. The financial pressure becomes unbearable. After 6 months of regular shakedowns, you're behind on rent, have pulled Kira from the technical academy because you can no longer afford tuition, have started buying the cheapest possible food and cutting meals to 2 per day to preserve credits. Sarah has taken a full-time position in a textile factory, working 12-hour shifts for minimum wage, and still it's not enough to cover both your living expenses and the weekly or bi-weekly police extortion payments that have become as predictable as any business cost. You consider closing the shop and finding employment elsewhere, but who would hire a 43-year-old repair technician with no formal credentials when thousands of younger workers with academy certifications compete for every available position? Then one evening, 8 months into your nightmare of systematic exploitation, you're working late to complete a rush repair job when your shop door crashes open and a flood of CSF officers pours in. Not 2, but 10, all wearing tactical gear and carrying drawn blasters, their helmet visors down, creating faceless masks of authority and violence. They're shouting commands that overlap into incomprehensible noise. On the ground, hands behind your head, don't move. And you're so shocked by the sudden invasion that you freeze for a critical second before compliance, which one officer interprets as resistance, and he rushes forward and strikes you across the face with his baton, the impact exploding stars across your vision and sending you stumbling backward into your workbench. Your hands go up reflexively to protect yourself, and another officer grabs your wrists and wrenches them behind your back, while a third kicks your legs out from under you, dropping you hard onto the Duracrete floor that smells of machine oil and old metal, and then stun cuffs are locked around your wrists, the metal cold and tight enough to restrict circulation, sending a continuous low-voltage shock through your arms that makes your muscles spasm. You're under arrest for trafficking in stolen goods, conspiracy to support insurgent activities, and violations of Imperial security statutes, Section 94 through 97. One officer announces, and you try to process the words through the pain radiating from where the baton struck your cheekbone. Stolen goods, insurgent activities. You've never committed any crime, have spent your entire adult life scrupulously following laws precisely to avoid this kind of situation, but your protests are ignored as officers swarm through your shop with portable scanners, systematically cataloging your inventory and equipment. They load you into a police transport, where you're shoved onto a metal bench alongside 2 other detainees, a Rhodian male bleeding from his nose and a human woman whose eye is already swelling shut, and the vehicle lifts off into Coruscant's endless traffic streams. The CSF detention facility on Level 2. 1400 is a sprawling complex of holding cells and interrogation rooms. Its walls bear durasteel painted institutional gray, its lighting harsh and fluorescent, its air carrying the smell of fear and disinfectant and something organic that might be vomit or blood. They process you like cargo, scanning your retinas and fingerprints, confiscating your personal effects, including your comlink, which means you cannot contact Sarah to tell her where you are, stripping you down to undergarments and forcing you through a chemical decontamination shower that burns your eyes and leaves your skin feeling raw. Then they issue you a prisoner jumpsuit in bright orange that immediately identifies you as detained, regardless of whether you've been convicted of anything, and they throw you into a holding cell designed for perhaps 6 occupants, but currently housing 23. The cell is 4 meters by 5 meters, with a single toilet against the back wall offering no privacy. 3-tier bunks that don't provide sleeping space for everyone, so the weakest prisoners sleep on the floor, and 1 small viewport showing nothing but the opposite wall of the detention block. Your cellmates are a cross-section of Coruscant's lower levels, petty thieves and unlicensed vendors and beings arrested for public intoxication or failure to pay fines, or simply being in the wrong place when CSF needed to meet arrest quotas. The Rhodian with the broken nose is there, and he tells you through swollen lips that he was arrested for selling fruit without a vendor license, beaten during processing because he asked to contact his family. A Duros male in the corner has been here for 5 days without seeing a magistrate or lawyer, arrested for loitering with suspicious intent, which he explains meant standing outside his own apartment building while waiting for a friend. You spend 3 days in that cell, 72 hours that blur together into a nightmare of boredom and fear and increasingly desperate worry about your family. Does Sarah know where you are? Are the children safe? Has the shop been vandalized in your absence? The food arrives twice daily through a slot in the door, a tray containing gray nutrient paste and stale bread and water that tastes of chemicals. The lights never fully dim, keeping prisoners in a state of perpetual artificial day that destroys normal sleep cycles. The toilet clogs frequently, and the smell becomes unbearable until guards finally respond to requests for maintenance, and even then their response is grudging and accompanied by threats that complaining prisoners can be moved to less comfortable accommodations if they continue causing trouble. On the fourth day, your designation number is called, and guards escort you to an interrogation room, a space 3 meters square containing a table and 2 chairs, one wall featuring a large mirror that you know conceals observation equipment. They cuff you to a ring mounted on the table and leave you alone for 30 minutes, a classic intimidation tactic designed to increase anxiety before questioning begins. When the interrogator finally enters, he's a CSF detective in plain clothes, dark slacks and a gray shirt, a blaster prominent on his hip, middle-aged with thinning hair and the tired eyes of someone who has conducted thousands of these sessions and long ago stopped caring whether the subjects are actually guilty. He drops a datapad on the table and displays a holographic image, a young human male you vaguely recognize. "Know this person?" the detective asks, his tone conversational but his posture radiating predatory focus. You study the image and memory surfaces. A customer from perhaps 6 weeks ago, someone who came into your shop needing a replacement power coupling for a speeder bike. He bought parts from me, once, maybe a month and a half ago. His name is Jace Rendar. He's a confirmed member of a rebel cell operating in Coruscant's lower levels. We arrested him 2 weeks ago with explosives and insurgent propaganda. His comlink records show multiple contacts with your business. The detective swipes through additional images showing your shop's exterior, time-stamped recordings of the customer entering and leaving. You sold parts to a known insurgent. That makes you an accomplice to terrorism. Your stomach drops because you understand immediately how the narrative works. Under Imperial law, providing any material support to insurgents, even unknowingly, can be prosecuted as conspiracy. The fact that you had no knowledge of the customer's affiliations is legally irrelevant if the prosecution can establish that you should have known, based on whatever arbitrary standard they apply. "I had no idea who he was," you say, trying to keep panic out of your voice. "He was a walk-in customer, paid cash for standard parts. I run background checks on commercial accounts, but individual customers, there's no way to screen thousands of walk-ins." The detective shrugs as if your explanation is irrelevant. Imperial Security Statute 45B requires all commercial operators to report suspicious individuals to CSF. Did you file a report on this customer? "He wasn't suspicious. He bought a power coupling." And you have no procedures for identifying potential insurgents among your clientele. That's negligence at minimum, possibly willful blindness. The detective leans back in his chair, studying you with clinical detachment. The charges are serious. Conspiracy to support insurgent activities carries a mandatory minimum of 20 years labor camp assignment. Add in the stolen goods violations we documented in your shop. What stolen goods? Everything in my inventory is legally sourced. We found 16 power cells that match batch numbers from a theft reported 3 months ago at a government warehouse. How do you explain having stolen Imperial property? You can't explain it because you know it's impossible. You source all components from legitimate suppliers who provide certification of origin, but proving that requires access to your business records, which are now in CSF custody and likely being manipulated or destroyed to support their fabricated case. This is insane. I'm being framed. Those cells came from Coruscant Industrial Supply, a licensed vendor whose records show no sale to you of those specific batch numbers. The detective slides another data sheet across the table, showing supply records that indeed contain no record of the transaction you distinctly remember making, and you realize the depth of the fabrication. They've either altered digital records or pressured your supplier into deleting the transaction, creating documentary evidence of guilt where none exists. You're looking at 25 to 30 years combined charges. Your family will be grown and gone before you see them again. He pauses to let that image settle into your imagination. Kira and Davin as adults, your wife aged by decades of your absence, before continuing in a softer tone. But there's an alternative resolution available. Here it comes, you think, the second phase of the extortion. Destroy the victim utterly, then offer a way out that requires total surrender. The prosecutor's office is authorized to offer plea agreements in cases where defendants show remorse and cooperation. You plead guilty to the charges, accept a fine and probationary period rather than incarceration, and this whole thing resolves quickly and efficiently. What's the fine? You ask, though you already know it will be impossible. 10,000 credits, payable immediately before the plea is filed. 10,000 credits is more than you earn in a year, even during profitable periods, an amount you've never possessed at one time that exists only in the collective savings of months or years of careful budgeting. I don't have 10,000 credits. My family doesn't have that kind of money. The detective's expression doesn't change. Then you'll need to liquidate assets, sell your business, your equipment, whatever generates sufficient funds. The plea offer is time-sensitive, available for 48 hours. After that, we proceed to formal prosecution, and you'll face decades in a labor camp. He stands, signaling the interrogation's conclusion. Think about your family. Think about whether your pride is worth more than being there to watch your children grow up. They return you to the holding cell where you spend 2 more days wrestling with impossible mathematics. Your shop and equipment might be worth 15,000 credits in a legitimate sale, but selling under duress with a 48-hour deadline means accepting whatever predatory offer you can find. And you know from years of watching Coruscant's business ecosystem that there are buyers who specialize in purchasing distressed assets at fractions of their value, vultures who circle failing businesses and extract profit from others' misfortune. The alternative is gambling that you can fight the charges in court, but Imperial justice on Coruscant is a bureaucratic conveyor system that processes defendants toward predetermined outcomes, and without expensive legal representation, you have no realistic chance of acquittal. On the 6th day, they allow you a single comlink call and you contact Sarah from a monitored terminal, her face appearing on the screen showing exhaustion and fear that makes your chest ache. She's been to the detention center 3 times trying to see you, been turned away each time with no explanation. The children are terrified, and rumors have spread through your apartment building about your arrest. Neighbors whispering about insurgent connections, some families refusing to let their children play with Davin because association with a suspected rebel's family might draw CSF attention. You explain the situation in the 3 minutes the system allows, trying to convey complex legal extortion through cryptic language because you know the call is recorded and anything you say can be used against you. Sarah understands immediately, her intelligence cutting through your careful phrasing to grasp the essential horror. You're being forced to surrender everything or face decades of imprisonment for crimes you didn't commit. Do what you have to do, she says, her voice breaking. Just come home, please. The shop sells for 9,000 credits to a buyer who appears within hours of you posting the listing. Too fast to be coincidence, suggesting he was tipped off by someone in CSF that a distressed sale was coming. The buyer is a human male in his 50s wearing expensive clothes and an expression of practiced sympathy that doesn't conceal his predatory satisfaction at acquiring your life's work for 60% of its value. The sale documents list the purchaser as Ven Terrick, and when you research the name later, you'll discover he's the nephew of Captain Ven, the CSF precinct commander you tried to report the original corruption to. The circle closes. Police create the pressure, provide the intelligence about desperate sellers, and their relatives profit from the forced sales, the whole mechanism functioning as wealth extraction from ordinary citizens directly into the pockets of those who wear badges. You pay the 10,000 credit fine and plead guilty to charges you didn't commit, signing documents that admit to trafficking in stolen goods and negligently providing material support to insurgents. And in exchange, You receive a suspended sentence with 5 years probation, during which any violation, however minor, will trigger immediate imprisonment. They release you after 8 days in detention, and when you step out of the CSF facility into Coruscant's perpetual artificial twilight, you stand on the platform trying to remember who you were before this nightmare began, trying to find any trace of the confident business owner who believed that honesty and hard work would protect him. Your apartment feels wrong when you return, as if the dimensions have shifted slightly, as if you're visiting someone else's life. Sarah embraces you, and you hold each other for long minutes without speaking because words are inadequate for what's been stolen from you. The children are different. Kira's eyes showing a hardness that wasn't there 2 weeks ago, a loss of innocence that makes you want to weep, and Davin flinching slightly when you try to touch his shoulder, some instinctive fear learned during your absence. The neighbors who were friendly 2 weeks ago now avert their eyes in hallways and common areas, the stigma of arrest marking you as dangerous or contaminated. Someone to avoid, lest association bring police attention to their own families. You try to find employment, scanning job listings and submitting applications to repair shops and maintenance facilities across a dozen levels. But your criminal record, visible in any background check, acts as automatic disqualification. The conviction for supporting insurgents marks you as politically unreliable, unemployable in any position with security considerations, which includes most technical work in Imperial Coruscant, where factories and repair facilities handle government contracts. You apply to 50 positions over 2 months and receive 3 interviews, each ending when the interviewer sees your record and suddenly remembers the position has been filled. The credits from selling your shop deplete rapidly despite careful rationing. Rent on level 2. 1,500 is 800 credits monthly. Food for 4 people costs roughly 600 if you buy the cheapest NutriPaste and synthesized proteins. Utilities and transport add another 300, and suddenly the 9,000 credits that seemed like a fortune during the coerced sale is evaporating at the rate of 2,000 per month with no income to replace it. After 3 months, your landlord, who has seen your criminal record because such things become public knowledge in communities where everyone survives by monitoring their neighbors for threats, informs you that he's declining to renew your lease, offering a transparently false excuse about needing the unit for family members but unable to hide his discomfort with housing a convicted insurgent supporter. You move to level 1,500. 1,200 meters lower in Coruscant's vertical geography, where the architecture is older and more decayed, where the lighting is dimmer because maintenance budgets decrease the farther down you go, where crime is more prevalent because CSF patrols are less frequent. Your new apartment costs 500 credits monthly, a savings that comes with corresponding reductions in space, 2 rooms instead of 3, forcing the children to share space they've outgrown, and amenities, with temperamental climate control and water recycling that produces suspicious brown liquid you have to filter before drinking. Your neighbors here are the same economically marginal beings you've become. Families that lost manufacturing jobs when factories automated, immigrants from war-torn systems trying to gain citizenship through work, individuals with criminal records or addiction problems that prevent employment in higher levels. Sarah's factory job becomes the family's sole income, her 12-hour shifts producing barely enough to cover rent and food, nothing left for savings or small comforts or the education you dreamed of providing your children. Kira has abandoned hope of returning to the technical academy and instead works part-time in a cantina on level 1,300, serving drinks to factory workers and accepting their wandering hands and crude comments because she needs the tips to help feed her family and cannot afford the luxury of outrage. Davin has started associating with a street group, not quite a gang, but moving in that direction. Adolescent boys who provide the belonging and purpose he cannot find in a home defined by economic desperation and a father marked as criminal. You descend into depression, spending days in the apartment staring at walls, your mind replaying the cascading series of injustices that destroyed everything you built. The police who extorted you, the false charges, the coerced confession, the forced sale of your business. Each memory is a weight pressing down on your chest, making it difficult to breathe, and some mornings you cannot find the energy to rise from bed, cannot identify any reason to continue participating in a life that has become synonymous with failure and humiliation. Sarah tries to help, but she's drowning too, working herself to exhaustion for wages that barely cover survival, coming home too tired for anything beyond basic function. 18 months after your release, walking back from a failed job interview on level 1800, you see him, the detective who extracted your coerced confession, who engineered the false charges that destroyed your life. He's standing beside a brand new luxury speeder parked in a commercial district, the vehicle gleaming with expensive chrome detailing and custom modifications that easily cost 30,000 credits. More than 5 times his annual detective's salary, according to public records of CSF compensation. He's wearing civilian clothes expensive enough to confirm what you already suspected. His income derives not from his government paycheck, but from the systematic extortion of citizens unlucky enough to fall into his orbit. Something breaks inside you, not dramatically, not with any sound or physical sensation, but a fundamental alteration in your psychological architecture, a wall that had been holding back rage and hatred crumbling into dust. You approach him before consciously deciding to move, your feet carrying you across the platform while your mind watches from somewhere distant. He doesn't recognize you initially. Why would he? You're just one of thousands of people he's processed through interrogation rooms and coerced confessions, but when you speak your name, recognition flickers across his features. "You destroyed my life," you say, your voice emerging strange and flat, emotionless despite the fire burning behind it. "The charges were false. The evidence was planted. You knew I was innocent and you did it anyway." The detective regards you with an expression somewhere between amusement and contempt, the look of someone observing an insect that has demonstrated unexpected persistence. "Innocent?" He shakes his head slowly. Nobody is innocent in the Empire. Everyone is guilty of something, some regulation violation, some tax discrepancy, some unauthorized thought. My job isn't to determine guilt or innocence. My job is to maintain order and generate revenue for Imperial administration. You were identified as a suitable target based on established criteria. Business owner with assets worth seizing, no powerful connections, no resources to mount effective legal defense. The system worked exactly as designed. The system is corrupt. You're a criminal with a badge. I'm an officer of Coruscant Security Force operating within my authorized parameters. Everything I did was legal under Imperial statutes. Your business violated multiple regulations. Those violations may have been minor or even fabricated, but they existed in our database, and that's what matters legally. You sold to a customer who was later identified as an insurgent. That's material fact, not fabrication. The stolen goods in your inventory were documented and photographed. Where they came from originally is irrelevant to the charges. Everything was legal, all procedures were followed, and the system generated the outcome it was designed to produce: transfer of assets from weak citizens to strong institutions. He opens his speeder door, clearly finished with the conversation. You should have paid the initial fines and accepted your position. Resistance only made things worse for you. The Empire rewards compliance and crushes defiance. You learned which category you fell into. He lifts off into traffic, and you stand on the platform feeling something that you will later recognize as the death of your faith in the possibility of justice, the final shedding of any illusion that law exists to protect the innocent or restrain the powerful. You understand with perfect clarity that in Imperial Coruscant, and by extension across all worlds that live under the Empire's control, police are not guardians of order, but predators authorized by state power, that laws are not protections but weapons wielded against the weak, that the entire apparatus of courts and regulations and enforcement serves primarily to transfer wealth and power from ordinary citizens to those who wear uniforms and carry badges. 3 months later, Sarah dies from pneumonia that began as a treatable respiratory infection but became fatal because you couldn't afford proper medical care, because the free clinics in the lower levels are overwhelmed and understaffed, because the Empire prioritizes military spending over civilian health infrastructure. She dies in your arms in the apartment on level 1500. Her last words an apology. For what you cannot fathom because she did nothing wrong, sacrificed everything trying to hold your family together after the system destroyed you. You hold her body until it grows cold, and then you contact the municipal death services who collect her remains for processing, their fees consuming the last of your credits. You are 45 years old and look 60, your hair completely gray, your face deeply lined, your body thin from malnutrition and the physical toll of persistent stress. Kira has left home, disappeared into Coruscant's lower levels where you hope she's found work or companions, but fear she's fallen into the sex trade or spice addiction that consumes so many young beings without prospects. Davin is fully involved with a street gang now, coming home with bruises and suspicious injuries he won't explain, carrying weapons you pretend not to notice because confronting him might sever the fragile thread still connecting you. You sleep in shelters for the homeless on level 1200, communal spaces housing 200 beings in a warehouse with cots and basic sanitation, surrounded by others whom the system has discarded. Addicts and mentally ill and unemployable, and everyone who fell through whatever minimal social safety net the Empire bothers to maintain. Sometimes, lying on your cot at night, listening to the coughs and moans and sleep cries of hundreds of broken people, you think about the detective's words. You should have paid the initial fines and accepted your position. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps if you'd simply accepted the initial extortion, paid the bribes indefinitely, submitted to systematic exploitation, you could have maintained your shop and your apartment and your family in their familiar configurations. Perhaps resistance was the mistake, and the proper strategy was always surrender, accepting that honest citizens exist to be farmed by those with power, that fighting back only marks you for destruction. But you cannot quite embrace that conclusion because doing so would mean accepting that your life, all the years of skill development and relationship building and careful parenting, was fundamentally worthless, that your role in the galaxy was always to be prey, and some stubborn remainder of dignity refuses that interpretation. You were not supposed to live like this. You worked hard, followed rules, raised children with love and discipline, contributed to your community through honest labor. The fact that doing everything right still resulted in total destruction suggests not that you failed, but that the system is designed to produce these outcomes, that the Empire requires a permanent underclass of broken beings as a warning to everyone else. Submit or be destroyed. The rebellion makes its first significant impact on Coruscant 2 years after Sarah's death, when Alliance operatives destroy an Imperial intelligence facility in the upper levels, killing 37 ISB agents and broadcasting insurgent propaganda across planetary communication networks for 90 seconds before being suppressed. The response is immediate and overwhelming. CSF and Imperial Army units sweep through mid and lower levels, conducting mass arrests, detaining thousands of beings on suspicion of rebel sympathy, torturing them for information about insurgent cells that mostly don't exist at these levels, because the rebellion has minimal presence on Coruscant's lower strata, where surveillance is too pervasive and desperation makes beings vulnerable to turning informant for 100 credits. You're arrested during these sweeps, pulled from the shelter at 3 in the morning and thrown into a detention center, along with 300 other males from surrounding levels, all of you crammed into a cargo bay and left for 16 hours without food or water or access to sanitation facilities. They separate you into groups for interrogation, and you endure 12 hours of questioning by an ISB officer in black uniform who demands you identify rebel sympathizers you've encountered, describe any suspicious activities you've witnessed, provide names of anyone who has spoken critically of the Empire. You know nothing useful. Your existence in the lower levels has been entirely focused on daily survival. But the interrogator doesn't believe you, administers electrical shocks to your feet and hands with devices designed to maximize pain while leaving minimal permanent damage. Chemicals injected into your bloodstream that make your skin feel like it's burning from inside. Eventually, they determine you're genuinely worthless as an intelligence source and release you back into the lower levels with a warning that further arrests will result in permanent detention. You return to the shelter with electrical burns on your hands and a nervous system so damaged that random muscles spasm without warning, making it difficult to hold objects or walk without stumbling. The galaxy changes around you in ways that barely register in your diminished existence. The Death Star is destroyed at Yavin, the Emperor and Vader are killed at Endor. The Empire fragments into warlord territories, while a new republic forms from Rebel Alliance forces. Down on level 1200, these cosmic shifts mean almost nothing. Different flags on government buildings, different faces in propaganda broadcasts, but the same fundamental structures of power and exploitation. The CSF officers who patrolled your former neighborhood still patrol it, still shake down business owners, still fabricate charges to extort citizens. The shelters still overflow with broken beings. The lower levels still exist in perpetual twilight and neglect. You're 48 years old, and your body is failing from accumulated damage and deprivation. Your heart irregularly skips beats. Your lungs struggle with the contaminated air of lower levels. Your kidneys are deteriorating from years of inadequate nutrition and contaminated water. You've lost contact with both children. Kira vanished into the underworld 3 years ago, and despite searching through lower-level cantinas and asking everyone you encounter, no one has seen her or admits to knowing her fate. Davin was killed in a gang fight when he was 19. His body found in an alley with 17 stab wounds, and you identified him at the municipal morgue where his face was so damaged you recognized him only by a birthmark on his shoulder. One evening, standing on a platform on level 1000 watching the endless stream of traffic flow past in the artificial twilight, you see your reflection in a window and barely recognize yourself. The man staring back is skeletal, his eyes sunken deep in their sockets, his skin gray and covered in sores that don't heal properly, his hands shaking with permanent tremors from nerve damage. You are a ghost haunting the lower levels of Coruscant, a warning written in flesh about what happens when ordinary citizens encounter the machinery of Imperial law enforcement. You think about the chain of causality that brought you here. Those first CSF officers demanding 300 credits for a fabricated violation, the systematic extortion that drained your savings, the false arrest orchestrated to seize your business, the coerced confession that destroyed your employability, the cascade of losses that followed. Each step was legal under Imperial statutes, each action taken by officers operating within their authorized parameters, each outcome documented in official records that show a system functioning exactly as designed. The police on Imperial worlds are not corrupt aberrations from an otherwise functional system. They are the system, implementing policies that transfer wealth from weak citizens to powerful institutions, that maintain social control through fear and arbitrary enforcement, that generate revenue through systematic extortion dressed in legal language. Every officer who shook you down was acting rationally within incentive structures that reward extraction and punish mercy. Every detective who fabricated evidence was meeting performance metrics that prioritize arrests and asset seizures over justice. Every captain who ignored corruption complaints was protecting a system that enriches him and his relatives. You understand now what you couldn't see 25 years ago when you believed that honesty and hard work would protect you. The law exists not to constrain power, but to legitimize it, to provide the appearance of justice while enabling systematic exploitation. The police are not separate from this system but central to it, the enforcement mechanism that ensures ordinary beings remain compliant and available for harvesting by those wearing badges and uniforms. On your good days, and there are fewer of them as your health deteriorates, you try to warn others, standing outside shelters or soup kitchens and telling anyone who will listen about what happened to you, about how the system works, about the danger of believing that law protects the innocent. Most people hurry past, unwilling to engage with a homeless man who looks insane and smells of unwashed clothing and speaks in urgent tones about conspiracies. A few stop and listen, and you see in their eyes the recognition of beings who have experienced their own versions of your story, who know from personal experience that what you're describing is not paranoia, but accurate observation. One young woman, a Twi'lek perhaps 25 years old who operates a food cart on level 1300, listens to your entire story, and when you finish, she touches your hand with something like compassion. "My father had a repair shop too," she says quietly. CSF squeezed him for 2 years, then arrested him on fake charges. He died in detention before trial. I know what they are. Most people know, even if they won't admit it. You die on a cold night 3 years after the Empire's official dissolution, your body giving out from accumulated damage in a shelter bed surrounded by strangers who don't know your name. The municipal services collect your remains and cremate them in a mass processing facility, your ashes mixed with hundreds of others who died that week in Coruscant's lower levels, beings without families or resources or anyone to claim them. You're 48 years old, and you leave behind no legacy except memories in a few minds that will themselves fade when those beings die, and a case file in CSF archives documenting your crimes, trafficking in stolen goods, supporting insurgents, lies that will stand as your official history, evidence that the system worked correctly in identifying and prosecuting a criminal. But your story is not unique. It's replicated across Imperial space in millions of variations. The shopkeeper on Lothal, whose business is seized through fabricated tax violations. The factory worker on Corellia, arrested for complaining about working conditions and charged with inciting labor unrest. The doctor on Naboo, who treats a wounded insurgent and faces charges of providing material support to terrorism. The teacher on Alderaan, who assigns literature the Empire deems seditious and loses her position and pension. The mechanisms vary slightly by world and local administration, but the fundamental pattern remains constant. Ordinary citizens existing as resources to be exploited by those with power, with police serving as the primary extraction mechanism. The New Republic promises reform, establishes commissions to investigate Imperial-era abuses, prosecutes a few high-profile cases against the most egregious offenders. But the structures that enabled your destruction remain largely intact because they serve the interests of those who control them. The officers who extorted you retire with full pensions. The detective who fabricated evidence against you transitions smoothly into security consulting for corporate clients. Captain Venn and his nephew continue operating their schemes under new government with minor adjustments to avoid the most obvious criminality. The system adapts, survives, perpetuates itself because corruption is not a bug but a feature, not an aberration but the intended design. Somewhere on Coruscant tonight, a CSF officer in the new government's blue uniform approaches a small business owner and identifies a regulatory violation that doesn't exist, offering to resolve the issue for immediate payment. Somewhere, a family is evicted from their home through legal mechanisms that serve the interests of wealthy landlords and corrupt officials. Somewhere, a being is arrested on fabricated charges because they possess something valuable that authorities want to seize. The faces change, the rhetoric shifts, but the fundamental dynamics persist because they reflect deep structures of power that transcend any particular government. This is what police are like on Imperial planets and on New Republic planets, and on any world where law serves power rather than constraining it. They are predators authorized by state violence, extractors of wealth disguised as guardians of order, enforcers of systems that grind ordinary beings into dust while enriching those who wear badges. Understanding this truth doesn't enable escape. You understood it long before you died, and that knowledge didn't save you, but it at least provides clarity about the nature of the system that killed you. Your death passes unnoticed by the galaxy at large. One more casualty of systems that produce millions of such casualties every year. invisible losses that don't appear in casualty statistics or historical records. But you lived, and your life mattered, and the injustice of your destruction is real even if no authority acknowledges it. The fact that the system that killed you continues functioning, that the officers who destroyed you face no consequences, that beings with your story remain voiceless and powerless, this is not evidence that your suffering was justified, but that the systems perpetuating such suffering have not yet been truly challenged or dismantled. The cycle continues because those with power benefit from its continuation, because ordinary citizens lack the resources to resist effectively, because the machinery of law and enforcement has been optimized over generations to maximize extraction while minimizing resistance. And until some fundamental rupture occurs, some shift in power dynamics significant enough to make exploitation more costly than beneficial to those who profit from it, beings like you will continue to be destroyed by systems that call themselves justice while practicing organized predation. This is the truth about police on Imperial planets that no propaganda broadcast acknowledges, that no official record documents. They are not protectors, but parasites, not servants of justice, but instruments of exploitation, and the greatest trick they perpetuate is convincing ordinary citizens that the law exists to serve them rather than to control and extract from them. You learn this truth at the cost of everything you built and everyone you loved, and your death in a shelter on Coruscant's lower levels stands as testament to what happens when ordinary beings encounter the reality beneath the rhetoric of law and order. The galaxy moves forward, and somewhere new, businesses open, and new families build lives, and new beings believe that honesty and hard work will protect them from the systems that devoured you. And the cycle will continue until it doesn't, until something breaks or shifts or transforms in ways that cannot yet be predicted. But tonight, on 1,000 worlds, police officers in various uniforms approach citizens with minor violations and calculated threats, and the machinery of extraction continues its work, grinding through lives as efficiently as any factory processes. Raw materials, and the only certainty is that tomorrow will produce new victims whose stories will mirror yours in all the ways that matter.